Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our final segment of today's show, let's talk about the fantasy fact or fiction. One of my favorite segments to bring into the show, justifying and debunking bold fantasy claims week in, week out. Is going to come to a conclusion, not necessarily in terms of predictions that I'm able to make here, but from a regular season perspective, talking about important games that will get you into the fantasy playoffs. And even if you are already in the fantasy playoffs, it's always a fun segment to conclude my Tuesday show. So without further ado, let's jump into the final, quote-unquote, meaningful one for the regular season. So let's start off with a game that I feel like is going to be determined, like I said, in the trenches, because both of these teams are very strong in those areas. Both offensive lines are good, both defensive lines are good. So it's going to really come down to complementary football and which offense can get it going. Because I think that the Steelers with the Eagles is going to be a defensive slugfest. I can firmly put that in the fact camp here, because of the fact that I think both of these teams have quarterbacks who are highly capable of delivering downfield for them. Jalen Hurts is an exceptional downfield passer when his game is on with A.J. Brown, and I know they're having complicated situations right now in that regard, but I still think that at the end of the day, you can never doubt Jalen Hurts as a passer. And so that's why I feel like the Eagles have that second gear in them, but are still very going to be much reliant upon Saquon in his play in this game. Whereas the Steelers also kind of play this complementary style. Not necessarily more of a running team, because Russell Wilson is more apt to throw the deep ball than Jalen Hurts, and he loves his connection with George Pickens, and he loves having different receivers at his disposal that he feel can exploit certain coverages. But I do think that they're a very complementary offense, because Najee Harris is someone who can get going, and we see that Jalen Warren also complements that backfield so well. But ultimately, this is going to come down to the defensive slugfest that I feel is going to ensue. And so you might not necessarily roster many people from this game for your first fantasy playoff game, but it's still going to come down to how they utilize their philosophies. If Russell Wilson can get a couple deep shots in this game, if Saquon Barkley sets the tone, then you can feel as if there is fantasy production to be had here. If not, then you might want to shy away from this one. But we just know that there is more talent here than you think. It's just going to have to come from special play, because both of these defenses are really locked in. I don't see how it's not going to become an ugly game determined by one or two miracle plays. So that's what I think of this one. So then the second one I want to talk about here is about Jayden Daniels, because this is an offensive rookie of the year race that might not be decided yet in people's minds. We talked about it a little bit before last week, but I do think that coming off the bye, he's going to distance himself I don't think he's going to distance himself in the offensive rookie of the year race with a top 5 performance. I think he's going to be efficient in this game. I think this Commander is going to look good coming out from the bye against this very weak Saints team, who has won 3 of 4, I must add, but really aren't necessarily playing for much here, and have lost Derek Carr for the season, for that matter. Jayden Daniels is going to prove that he is still in this offensive rookie of the year race very firmly, but not necessarily distance himself, because I do think Bo Nix is a case as well. And the fact of the matter is, Jayden Daniels is more efficient than productive, in my opinion. He only has 15 touchdowns to his name for the air this season. And he doesn't have many yards either to speak for himself. And so that's the thing that really makes this offensive rookie of the year race a lot more heated than people realize it is. And while I do think Jayden Daniels has a bit of the upper hand because he looks the more explosive of the two, I do feel like Bo Nix is still in this because of the way he's matured in the Sean Payton offense, because of the fact that offense really has been clicking these past couple of weeks and has gotten them into that wildcard slot in the AFC, whereas the Commanders have had rough stretches this season and haven't really proven they can maintain that level these past couple of weeks. And so that's why I feel like while Jaden Daniels is firmly in this discussion and continues to prove it through his efficient style of play, he's not going to quote-unquote distance himself, and he's not going to be, in my opinion this week, a top 5 fantasy performer. So that's why it's in the fiction camp. And then the third one I want to talk about, let's talk about the Raiders defense, because that's a unit for the Raiders that's been playing with passion. Them being fantasy sleepers. This is firmly in the fact camp. A lot of people might have already made up their minds going into the playoffs about which defense they want to stick with. But defense, like I said, is another one of those volatile positions where you can pick up someone and feel comfortable starting them week in, week out. It's just a game of craps, I guess. You have to kind of pick and choose your battles here. But the Raiders' defense has proven that out of all of these quote-unquote moribund teams, that they have a defense more than capable of giving you solid fantasy output. And not for nothing, this is a defense that, yes, has so much pressure on it because of the fact this offense is terrible. And what it looks like from here on out with Desmond Ridder at quarterback beats me. But I still believe that the players here are better than the sum of their parts. It's just that they're in a very difficult situation. Look at what Max Crosby is doing this season. He's played over 750 defensive snaps. He has been a true warrior, a true maverick at that defensive line position. And he's really proving himself to be a dark horse defensive player of the year candidate. If you know Las Vegas is a better team than what their record shows. But at the end of the day, we don't necessarily think of the Raiders defense because of how bad they are right now. But ultimately, down the stretch, they're going to be the most important factor for what the Raiders look like in these meaningless games. Because if they want to play spoiler, they have the defense to do it. But it's all going to depend on if the offense complements them well. And that's the thing, because I think the Las Vegas Raiders are closer to contention than we think. And yeah, if that whole package deal of the Sanders family coming to them means anything, then I do think, that there can be excitement around this team yet again. But I think you're going to have to invest in this defense and its talent there if you really want to make this a contending team, because I do really love this team. But in these next couple of weeks, the fantasy playoffs, if your defense isn't defined just yet, look for them to potentially be the team you might want to look at. And then the last one I want to talk about, let's talk about a player who's kind of lit up these past couple of weeks in terms of his play at the wide receiver position, proving the depth of the wide receiver position here. Let's talk about Jerry Jeudy. Lighting it up potentially against the Chiefs, I think is firmly in the fiction camp, because Jerry Jeudy, yes, because of Jameis Winston, has seen his stats skyrocket, has seen his production go up, has seen his target share go up, what have you. But I do think that against the Chiefs, in a game that I do feel like could be very thrilling to watch and very, very high scoring at that, I feel like Jerry Jeudy is one of those guys who I can't fully commit to continuing hot streaks, because he is a stellar receiver for this Browns team. He's proven that. He is a very savvy route runner, very speedy, very vertical in nature. But at the end of the day, against the Chiefs team that, yes, you can exploit their deficiencies, but are still better than you, I feel like Jerry Jeudy is someone who I can't really justify in terms of continuing the stretch, because the Browns, let's be real, are a very fun team, but they're not a very good one. And as long as Jameis Winston has this nature to throw picks, they're going to be a roller coaster ride, where one day they can put up 40 points on you, but because of Jameis Winston's picks the next day, they can only put up 14 or so, much like they did this past week against Pittsburgh, where after that exciting offensive showcase against Denver that last week, they kind of fell flat because of Jameis. And for nothing, Jerry Jeudy had a long touchdown in this game, but if you're relying on a quarterback who's very prone to turning the ball over to throw you the football, chances are more frustration is going to set in. And so that's why, as much as I love Jerry Jeudy when he's done these past couple of weeks, really skyrocketing in the passing yards charts as well. putting up insane numbers. This is a team that is too roller coaster to really invest in. And so as much as I love a lot of these Browns players, as long as Jameis makes those mistakes, I can't really say they're going to separate themselves in this one. Ultimately, this will just about do it for today's show. I love talking about fantasy fact or fiction as always, but at least for the regular season, it's going to come to a close. But this has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back here tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time for another great show. Like, follow, and subscribe. Continue making yourselves available to the Super Chats, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, I am out for today.